This is Fresh Air. I'm Terry Gross. My guest, Marc Maron, is a comic who does what some people describe as alternative comedy. He used to host short attention span theater on Comedy Central. He's now off-Broadway doing his comic monologue, The Jerusalem Syndrome. The show is about the search for some kind of transcendent meaning. The review in The New Yorker said, Maron is fully aware of all the dubious idols that have replaced God in our culture, and he pulls no punches in pointing them out. He leads the audience into purgatory and back as he tries to find some kind of spiritual resonance in Hollywood fame, cigarettes, The Wiz, Coke, and Israel. He may not be the Messiah, but he's definitely the guy to tell you where you won't find him. Maron's monologue begins with the story of being invited by a friend to go to Israel. He accepts and buys a camcorder to take with him. I asked him why he wanted the camcorder.
I don't know. I never owned one. I've always been sort of against the whole idea. I'm sort of even against taking pictures because I think they're false representations of good times. For some reason, I felt that it was necessary for me to take the camcorder in order to have some sort of religious interaction. I just thought just in case, I was addressed by the Almighty that I should certainly have the camcorder and be ready to tape any interaction.
Did the Almighty converse with you?
No, he broke my camcorder. There was a lesson to be learned, It took me, months to figure it out that, I had, surrendered my will to this, 1.5 by 2 inch viewfinder. I was walking through an illusion I could hold in my hand. And, there were, unfortunately, the moments where it wasn't working. I was so consumed with getting it fixed that I had a hard time enjoying the entire process of being in Israel. And oddly enough, I felt very frightened when the camcorder broke because I was directly, in contact with the Israeli sort of situation. I really think I was planning on taking it all in at home on my VCR in Queens, in my building where, Muslims, Jews, and Christians all live happily under one roof, unless there's a boiler problem. Then we rise up against the Dominican landlord. But aside from that, it's a lot more manageable than, really not knowing, where you are in the context of the culture over there, because there are so many towns that are now sort of up for grabs as far as Palestinian territories and whatnot. And I really am not educated in the dynamics of the Middle East that much. I come from, sort of sofa Zionists, my parents, we were not that educated in it, and I don't keep up with it. My parents were just people that sat at home and watched the news, and occasionally someone would say, oh, no, there's something wrong in Israel. Get the checkbook. Where do we write it? That was that.
Although you're not religious in terms of Judaism, you do feel like you have been part of the beatnik religion. What are the tenets of that faith, the way you've seen it practiced?
Well, it's a spiritual system. There are sacred texts. You have On the Road by Jack Kerouac for the ritual elements of the religion. You have Naked Lunch by William Burroughs for the morality and metaphysical elements of the religion. And you have Howl by Allen Ginsberg for the gay poetry elements of the religion. And I believe that all religions have a gay poetry element. I defy you to read the Song of Solomon in the Old Testament with a slight lilt in your voice, and you will find there most certainly must be a gay man behind that poem. It just wasn't popular to be an out gay poet during the Bible writing. Now, the tenets are actually, it's a spiritual system built on searching, embracing life, pushing the limits, being awake and wasted to be aware, being beat, questioning everything, freeing your mind. The path of excess leads to the palace of wisdom, man. Nothing is true. Everything is permitted. To be beat is to be holy, and to be holy is to be closer to God. When Kerouac was on a late-night talk show, he once said that all he wanted was to look God in the face. And then he threw up on himself during a commercial. That, and there are rituals. Do you want to hear about those?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, once you assemble your bohemian crew, which is, essentially 10 to 12 disenfranchised upper-middle-class white kids whose parents can afford to spend $40,000 for them to spend 4 years sinking their beatniks in college. The rituals are, there must be beer and cigarettes and coffee. You must read good poetry and write bad poetry and read that out loud. You must, smoke reefer and listen to jazz and stay up all night. And there's also room within the beatnik religion to call and ask your parents for money if you need it.
So did you make pilgrimages?
Oh, absolutely. Of course, any car ride with another person, pot, music, and no real destination is officially a beatnik pilgrimage. But, some are more important than others. I made pilgrimages, sure. My buddy Jim and I I think the most important pilgrimage was the pilgrimage to Jack Kerouac's grave. we went up there. It's a beautiful fall day, and you want to hear the poem?
Sure. And who wrote this poem?
This is a piece. That's a piece from the show. Where we climb behind the helm of a 1979 Honda 5-speed. A foreign car, a heresy, not really beat, but it was my dad's and it was free. The mellow hum of Japanese machinery propelled us towards our destiny. Boston to Lowell, all 45 miles, and we didn't fall asleep once. We talked about art, philosophy, politics, and what to have for lunch. We jammed to jazz and beat our hands on the dash, and I think we made it through half of Coltrane's Love Supreme when we pulled onto the path to the angelic Holy Hipster Cemetery and the tomb of St. Jack.
That's good. Now, you wrote this for the show?
Yeah. The odd thing is that I actually found myself, at that point in my life, after I did visit the grave of Kerouac, I wrote some sort of poem, of course. And I wasn't able to find it, and I think I'm thankful about that. I'd rather this sort of parody poem than, this sort of earnest doodlings of a guy who was just in love with the beatnik idea.
You've described yourself in the past as a paranoid agnostic. You said, I doubt the existence of God, but I'm sure there is some force somewhere working against me.
Yes. Well, that was I was younger when I wrote that, and as I get older, I'm trying to meet him halfway, and hopefully, not make enemies forever. You got to pick which God you want to work for.
Have you ever really envied people who did have faith?
I envy their ability not to be consumed with the sort of indulgent worries of somebody who has no faith at all. I think I've always been somebody who has had faith. I think that it's never been deeply rooted. You have faith when you need it. When things are going good, it's easy to go, man, everything's working out and I believe. But as soon as things get bad, I was never one of those people that automatically. I was always the opposite. I felt that, my faith was paying off when things were going well for me. But when they were going bad, I was just, angry at the world and everybody around me. So that's not real faith. So I think that, I resent or I envy people with real faith only because they seem to have, some sort of focus. It may not be healthy, but they do have some sort of focus, and it's usually restrictive, which I find annoying. But I think there's something about belief, whether it's in God or yourself or a particular product or there's something about the idea of belief as a human propelling force that I find interesting.
My guest is Marc Maron, and he's doing his comic monologue at the Westbeth Theater in New York through the 30th of September. Now some male comics do a lot of sex jokes, and a lot of it is pretty adolescent and kind of sexist too. Did you ever go through that period yourself in your comedy?
I do. I am a strong proponent. Is that the word? Supporter.
Yeah.
Of sexual material. I like blue material. I like I like people to go there. I don't know. I never went through a necessarily sexist period. I have spoken openly and honestly and sometimes graphically about sex, but I think that's a very important part of stand-up. In the way I see it, I think it's always been one of the few hot spots with people. I don't think people are ever above, or can condescend to sexuality. And I think that on some level, it is sort of kind of can be kind of nasty. And I have no problem with that. I think it's great. I think it's a vulnerable place, and it's a taboo place. And I think some of the best comedy comes from those places.
I'm wondering if there's some of the material you can do for us just to show us what you mean that would be, clean enough for radio. What do you think?
Well, the joke that I did about, getting older, I'm 36 years old, which isn't old, but you realize you're getting old in strange ways. Like I realized recently that teenage girls don't even acknowledge me as a sexual being anymore, And I mean, I don't want you to misunderstand me. I'm not saying I want to have sex with teenage girls. I'm just saying, hey, throw me a bone. How about a smile? Cute T-shirt. Look at me. Nothing. Unless it's to turn to their friends to go, why is that weird guy looking at us? What's he doing at the mall? I'm lying, Terry. Of course I want to have sex with teenage girls. I mean, doesn't everybody? I mean, that's why there's a law.
Is that part of the joke to say that?
Yes.
Right. Okay.
That is the joke.
That is the joke. Okay. Wasn't sure that was a personal aside to me or okay.
That is fairly lightweight. I find that my attitudes towards sex in my act, I've always had problems with people who, not people, but the criticism that stand-up is cheapened by sex, it's cheapened by blue material. Uh-huh. I just don't believe it. I believe that that's what stand-up should be about. I believe that, as a stand-up, it is, you should go there. Because that's why people come. That's what makes it exciting. That's what makes it, that's what pushes it to the edge. And I understand that, a lot of times it is approached adolescently, and a lot of times it is sexist, But on another level, these are also the voices. These are the inner voices of human sexuality. That you can choose what you like and what you don't like. But I think it's, I think it's important. I think it's an important dialogue to have. Within stand-up. I think it's one of the reasons that stand-up can be exciting. And all of my favorite comics have attacked it.
Did you grow up being uncomfortable talking about sex?
No, my parents were, very sexually inappropriate people. They were very crass. They were very, my father has always sort of had a robust, sexual, appetite, both verbally and otherwise. They were not, I was not in any sort of repressive environment. As a child. So it was always, around as far as conversations go and as far as jokes go.
My guest is comic Marc Maron. He's performing off-Broadway, doing his comic monologue, Jerusalem Syndrome. More after a break. This is Fresh Air. My guest is comic Marc Maron. He's currently doing his comic monologue, The Jerusalem Syndrome, at an off-Broadway theater. Were there moments during your early work as a comic that you found kind of humiliating, either because of the place you were playing or the reaction you got from the crowd or the fact that there wasn't a crowd?
Of course. It's still humiliating sometimes. What are you kidding? I mean, yeah, that never goes away. I was recently tackled on stage in Los Angeles, by an audience member.
Why?
Because I pushed his buttons. I like to push buttons.
What were you talking about?
What was I talking about? I was doing a joke about that used suicide in it, which isn't funny by itself, but, surrounded by other things can be hysterical. The joke had nothing to do with mocking suicide. It was about whatever the case, maybe I'll tell you the joke afterwards here. But, some guy in the front row said, don't do jokes about suicide. And, I said, well, I don't really think this joke is about suicide. I think it just, that's just part of the joke. It's not making fun of suicide. But he said, just don't do any more jokes about suicide or I'll take you out. And, then it really became something different, And, I said, what is your problem? Why do you need this attention from these people you don't know? What's going on with you? What is, and I really just started to sort of, fire my way into his psyche. And I really made a fool out of him, for interrupting my show and threatening me physically. And people were laughing. People were on my side. And then I very sort of, arrogantly, propped up after I succeeded in pummeling him comedically and said, are you still going to take me out? And he got up on stage and he tackled me. And, it was really awkward. We stood each other off. I'm really by nature, I'm not a fighter. You have two options as an animal, fight or flight. I come from a long line of flyers. And, and we were standing off and there was a music stand between us, and I didn't know if he was going to pick it up and hit me with it. And I really didn't know what to do. But because I was on stage, I ended up just sort of, hugging him. I just sort of jumped up on him and grabbed him. So and he grabbed me and we went down and, the audience dispersed and four people kind of, wrenched him off of me and, they're holding him down, and I'm standing on a chair, with the microphone still and the audience is, everything's in chaos. And this guy is like, wrenching back and forth in the hands of these, four men going, "Who's funny now?" You know.
So how did that evening end? Did they throw him out and then you went on with the act?
Well, I was the last performer, and I'd done about 20 minutes, so it actually turned out to be an excellent closing number.
Yeah.
What happened was, I'd like to say that, I sort of made my stand and took the hit for, comedy. But, what ultimately happened was, they threw him out. And what made this evening all the stranger was, Vincent D'Onofrio was there.
The actor? Uh-huh.
Yeah, so, I still to this day have a weird, strange thing with, boundaries in Hollywood. Like, I get there and I'm never really quite sure whether I'm in a movie or whatever's really happening is happening. And then when stars show up, I'm like, oh my God, we're in a movie. But what happened was they kicked him out. And, people were coming up to me. They were like, you probably should hang out for a while. Don't go outside or whatever. And, I'm like, I was really sort of shooken up. My shirt was sort of ripped open and whatnot. And, but I felt proud of the whole thing. I've really been waiting for years to be, attacked on stage, given the nature of what I do up there sometimes, And, but eventually I had to leave the club, So I walked out and a lot of people were out there, in the street, and they were all sort of talking about it. And I walk out, and and D'Onofrio was there, and he was like, "Are you okay, man? Do you gonna, do you need, And well, what happened was, the guy came back around with his friend in a car and pulled up out in front of the club when I was standing out in front there, and everybody was around, and gets out of the car, and I'm being sort of held back by Vincent D'Onofrio, and he's like, offering his assistance somehow. And a lot of people are offering their assistance, and they're like, just go back inside, Mark. And I'm like, you know what? Let's deal with this. So this guy's walking towards me, and I'm like, what is it? What is it that you want? Do you want to hit me? What do you need right now? And everybody was sort of sitting there, and he's like, I just want to, I got to talk to you. And I'm like, okay. So I put my arm around the guy, and I walked down the street with him by myself. And he said, look, I'm sorry, I'm not like that. I just, my brother, recently committed suicide, and and I'm like, well, okay, I understand that, but I still feel that, your behavior was inappropriate. He's like, yeah, I know, but you understand, right? I'm like, yeah, I understand, and it's cool, and I'm sorry about your brother, and we hugged, and he moved on into the night, and I moved on into my life. That's all.
I would like to hear what the joke was that upset him so much.
I'm trying to think, how's that joke set up? Wait. Yeah, like I was watching ESPN2, and I don't even like sports, and I'm watching, the second one. And all I have to say is that there is a shortage of sports worth covering on television, because I was watching a miniature golf championship, and I didn't know who to feel bad for, me watching a miniature golf championship, or the guy who's got to be the commentator, because he wanted bigger things, baseball, hockey, real golf, And he was there, and he was trying to make it interesting. He was like, well, he's at the most difficult hole. That's the windmill, of course. Look at him out there like Don Quixote. Gee, what's a guy like that got to be thinking in a moment like this? Let me take a crack at it. Blade, space. Blade, space. There's the shot. Oh, it hits the blade, and that's going to hurt him after the bogey at the Dinosaur. I think if he would have went with the red-handled putter and the blue ball, it would have been a different day from out there. I think it was that red-red combination that really screwed him up, don't you? And then I get sort of dirty. I go, and still in the voice, I go, did I mention I'm going to kill myself? Did I mention that? I mean, I'm covering miniature golf. I'm going to go back home to the house I grew up in, into my little room where my posters and my model airplanes are, and blow my brains all over a poster of the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders. Does anyone care? Well, we have a website here at ESPN2. That's basically the joke.
Right.
It's got nothing to do with suicide. It's sort of a sad portrait of a bitter man. But somehow or another, occasionally you don't know how people are going to respond and what your power is as a performer. And I a lot of times I create a sort of intimacy that doesn't allow much distance.
But I'm thinking here, it's partly the difference too between someone like you who's really verbal and who does everything through words, and someone who just like really doesn't know how to express themselves except through, say, you made me really angry, so now I have to fight you. Now I have to hurt you.
Yeah. Yeah, that was sort of what happened. But I believe me, Terry. I mean, I've been doing this for years,
Right.
and
This doesn't always happen. Yeah.
I've been hostile. I've been provocative in a confrontational way. I've really pushed my luck on stage in more ways than I can even remember. And it hasn't happened. And now at this point in my life where I've sort of leveled off and I don't need to do that. When you're younger, you really think you're angry about certain causes. And then as you get older and you realize that you might just be angry, you have to make choices around that. So, I mean, now at this point in my life where I've leveled off and I think I have a certain amount of being, I'm grounded up there, that this starts to happen is very interesting.
Well, Marc Maron, I want to thank you a lot for talking with us.
Thank you.
Marc Maron is performing his comic monologue Jerusalem Syndrome off-Broadway through the end of the month. I'm Terry Gross, and this is Fresh Air. 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 And this is Fresh Air.